You're standing in a school hallway, coffee in hand, first day back after winter break. You're already dreading it. And then, a group of 8-year-olds sprint toward you, wrapping their tiny arms around your waist, sobbing with relief. Not because something terrible happened to them, because your own principal told them you were leaving, and then told them to make your life miserable before you did. That was the moment I stopped trying to survive my first year of teaching and started planning something far more satisfying. If you've ever been underestimated, threatened, or had someone in power try to weaponize everything around you just to protect themselves, this one's for you. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and settle in. Because this story of one first-year art teacher taking down a corrupt school principal is one of the most deeply satisfying things you will hear all week. Let's get into it. Picture yourself 20-something years old. Fresh diploma, fresh idealism, a brand new art teacher job at a Title I elementary school, and here's the beautiful part, you can walk there. Life felt full of possibility. What I didn't know yet was that possibility was about to get buried under stacked desks, broken promises, and a principal who would make it her personal mission to end my career before it ever really started. A week before school started, I was eager, like annoyingly eager. I'd been calling and emailing the school office trying to get my keys and my badge so I could start setting up my classroom. No response. Nothing. Not a voicemail. Not even an automated reply. So I did what any reasonable adult would do. I called the district office directly. 2 days before the first bell rang, I finally got an email. Not from the district, from my principal. And it didn't contain my badge information. It was a scolding. She told me I should have been more patient and that I had no business contacting the main office about something as minor as my keys. My stomach did something uncomfortable reading that, but I brushed it off. First-year jitters. She's probably just busy. When I finally got into my classroom, I understood why no one had been in a rush to let me in. The room had been used as a storage unit. Tables stacked on tables. Chairs. I counted over 100 piled in every corner. 8 filing cabinets nobody seemed to want. The space looked like a furniture warehouse had a breakdown inside an elementary school. My saving grace was the custodian, an absolute legend who helped me haul everything out without being asked. If you've never taught in a public school, let me tell you something. The custodians run that building. They are the unsung architects of every teacher's sanity. We got it done. Barely, but we got it done. The morning of the first day of school, I still had no schedule. I didn't know which grades I was seeing, or when, or in what order. So I emailed my principal, politely, professionally, and asked if there was a digital copy I could print out. She emailed back within minutes to tell me I was pressuring and bullying her. I read that sentence 4 times. I was asking about a class schedule. I reread it again. Still the same words. I apologized anyway because I needed that schedule, and by 8:10 in the morning, 10 minutes after the first bell, it finally arrived. And what I saw made my chest tighten. 2 classes, scheduled, at the same time. In one classroom, with me, by myself. 46 kids, ranging from kindergartners to 6th graders, crammed into a single art room with no assistant, no support, and 45 minutes on the clock. I asked, calmly I thought, if we could look at adjusting things. She didn't answer calmly. She screamed at me, in the hallway, with students waiting outside my door. She told me it was my first year, and I didn't know what I needed, and I should just deal with it. So I dealt with it, my way. I went home that night and read the entire teacher's contract, cover to cover. And buried in the language of that document was a clause that made me sit up straight. Any class exceeding 30 students was legally entitled to an educational assistant. I'd been running 46. After a month and a half of working from 6 in the morning until 9 at night, yes, every weekday, because that's how long it took to plan, grade, document, and communicate with families when you had no prep time and no help. I brought this clause to my principal. She looked me dead in the eye and said there was no money in the budget. She told me to make do or quit. The union got involved shortly after, then did nothing. Weeks passed. The double classes continued. My health was quietly deteriorating. I was running on spite and determination and absolutely nothing else. Then came Thanksgiving, and the dinner that changed everything. I was at a potluck with old friends, desperately trying to forget school existed for 48 hours. And I ended up in a conversation with an old acquaintance and his husband, someone I'd never met before. They asked about my job. I tried to keep it surface level, but when you've been drowning for months, things slip out. I mentioned how much I loved my students, how creative they were, and how heartbreaking it was to not be able to give them the attention they deserved, especially with 2 classes sharing one room. The husband raised an eyebrow. He asked what school I worked at. I told him. The following Monday, my principal stormed into my classroom at 8:05 in the morning, shaking with rage, threatening to fire me and personally ensure I never worked in education again. It took me until later that week to connect the dots. The man at that dinner, he was her direct supervisor, the administrator over her entire cohort of schools. The schedule changed that Friday, 1 class at a time, 60 minutes per session, twice a week. For the first time since September, I could breathe. I thought that was the end of it. I was dangerously wrong. My principal responded to losing control by starting a surveillance campaign. She was suddenly in my doorway constantly, unannounced, unscheduled, watching. And slowly, some of my most cheerful students started arriving to class quiet, distant, eyes red. When I'd ask what was wrong, they'd break down crying. I don't want you to go. I kept telling them I wasn't going anywhere, that they were the best students I'd ever had, that nothing was changing. Then, the day before Christmas break, she walked into my room with a union rep, our building union rep, mind you, and presented me with a teacher support plan, an official document questioning whether my contract would be renewed. The union rep giggled as he walked out. Actually giggled. I went home and read that plan in full. And then I sat with that feeling, that sick, hollow, furious feeling of being set up for exactly as long as I needed to before I started making notes. Because the truth had finally landed. When I came back in January, those students who'd cried told me what really happened. My principal had pulled them aside and told them I was leaving because I didn't want to be there anymore. She told them to give me trouble before I was gone. She tried to weaponize 8-year-olds. That was my breaking point, and also my starting gun. Phase 1. I asked those students to draw me a comic book about their conversation with the principal, whatever ending they wanted. They got to work immediately. Phase 2. I contacted my principal's supervisor directly, my new friend from the dinner party, and invoked my contractual right to have another administrator present at all formal observations. Not just any administrator, him, and I asked him not to warn her in advance. The look on her face the first time he walked in beside her, laptop open, typing, while she stood there without so much as a notepad, asking to borrow poster paper to take notes. I will carry that image with me for the rest of my life. He just smirked. Phase 3. My principal had a habit of arriving late, sometimes 9:30. Once, apparently, at noon. Per her contract, unreported late arrivals should come out of her leave time. They weren't being reported, so I started texting her supervisor whenever she hadn't arrived by 8 a.m. Over the next month, he documented her late arrivals at least twice a week. HR showed up unannounced one morning at 9, and she still wasn't there. Phase 4. The after-school care program. I discovered that a contractor running our after-school program was charging families out of pocket at a Title I school where it was supposed to be completely free, funded by the district. I also happened to know that contractor was in a relationship with my principal, living with her, in fact. I started chatting with parents at pickup, casually, and I made a flyer. Clean, simple, with the website and the forms they needed to access the free program their kids were legally entitled to. Word spread fast. The next PTA meeting was something to witness, and I made sure my principal knew exactly who had informed those parents. Investigators from the central office, auditors. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know what had been happening at this little Title I school. The after-school contractor was removed. A district-approved provider took over. My teacher support plan was pulled from my record entirely. My principal was stripped of the ability to evaluate me or conduct any further observations. The second half of that school year was genuinely one of the most peaceful stretches of my professional life. And at the end of the year talent show, one of my students stood up and read his comic book aloud. The one about a principal who tried to turn students against their teacher. He read it in front of parents, staff, and a very uncomfortable administrator in the front row. I'm told a shoe may or may not have been thrown before she made it off stage. On the last day of school, she announced over the intercom that she was resigning to pursue a position where she was needed. She added that she would miss almost all of them. Almost all. The mic work alone. Legendary. 2 years later, I looked her up. New district. Different school. Stayed 1 year in administration before stepping back down to classroom teaching. An hour's commute from where she tried to end my career. Karma, it turns out, doesn't just knock. Sometimes it fills out the proper paperwork, CC's HR, and follows up. The students' comic ended like this. The art hero rallied the students. The angry principal could not become happy, so she left, and the power of happiness filled the school once again. I couldn't have written it better myself. If this story had you absolutely seething and then grinning from ear to ear, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And drop a comment below. What's the most satisfying piece of justice you've ever witnessed, delivered, or heard about? I want to read every single one. Subscribe if you're new, because we've got more stories just like this one waiting for you. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is read your contract, make a flyer, and show up every single day. See you in the next one.